This is why we believe that you cannot practice science without a belief in God, whether you consciously are aware of it or not.
All right, guys. Well, welcome to another episode of Terrence Thoughts. I am definitely passionate about today's topic. I'm gonna try my best to hush and just let my guests speak and elaborate as much as they like, but it's going to be difficult. But this is a continued series around faith, faith, religion, whatever you want to say. It's interchangeable for a lot of people. And so today we're going to talk about the dichotomy, the friction, maybe between faith and science. I'm someone who have always been intrigued by science and just the unknown, the discovery, the curiosity. And as I've gotten older, I found that there's been some tension between those in the science community and those in the religious sector. So my two guests today are very familiar. Hector Berlinda, who was here last week, and Kevin. How y'all doing tonight?
Doing good, man. It's good to be here again on Terrence Thoughts. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it,
Nice to
man.
be back.
I think we should start off. I titled this "Faith versus Science," but you could say it's religion or whatever the case may be. I find those things to be interchangeable for a lot of people. I use the word particularly faith because I think that's the core of what maybe agnostics or atheists kind of attack, is that we're, Christians or those in the religious sector, it's just going off of this fable, mystical being that was wrote about in a book. And we got facts, we got actual data to justify our position, and you just coming at me with this mystical thing that I cannot analyze or identify with. Do you have an opinion on this idea of what faith is and what religion is, or do you have an idea of what you want to talk about as far as science?
Good topic, man. Really good question too. I think I would like to first deal with maybe a misconception, which is faith and science are polarizing, or they're antithetical, or they're pitted. Now people do pit the two against one another, but it's actually impossible to separate the two. We'll probably get into it a lot more. Maybe, I don't know. I'm sure we'll probably have a series 2 to 3 and 4. Yeah. Pretty big topic, right? So I'll try to make sure I'm concise on what I'm saying here. So I think what has happened is that the word science has now been, and its reactions to two camps that we're talking about, two opposing views, those that have a biblical worldview and those that don't. Christians, however you want to use it, that the word science has now become synonymous to atheism. And from the Christian standpoint, right? So there is, when you hear, because you and I have talked a lot about, why do we feel like Christians are so averse or standoffish or repulsive to science? And that's not necessarily the case, because we all use scientific methodology and experimentation on a daily basis, right? In everything that we do, consciously and unconsciously, we're all utilizing it, right?
Ain't nobody using MapQuest no more. We on that GPS.
Well, just in anything, right? Like, I sat down in this chair because I induced that last time I sat in this chair, the laws of gravity held me here. So I assumed that in the future it'll do the same thing, right? Now, I didn't break this stuff down to the ridiculous, but that's essentially science, right? So I think that has happened in the community, and a lot of Christians are now averse to when you start talking about science or scientific methods or anything like that. You get a lot of Christians on edge. And that's because through most atheistic scientific methodology, we do have certain hypotheses such as the Big Bang Theory. So, we could go on and on and on, right? So that has become now synonymous to science. And when people use scientific community, I'm always like, I'm in the scientific community. I use science. I employ the laws, right? But I know what they're trying to say. So I think that's one reason Christians are unhinged. They or can become unhinged or a little bit skeptical or on alert, if you will, is because of the usage or the conclusions drawn from the atheistic worldview when employing science, because they don't own science, right? So I think it's unfair, and I understand I'm not coming at the title, I'm just saying for a lot of people to have in a thought process, faith versus science doesn't exist because those in the quote unquote faith community employ scientific methodology just like the atheist does. We just have different conclusions based on certain things.
And similarly, the science community relies on faith in a lot of the areas in how they draw conclusions. And we can break that down as well. But there's a lot of questions around, we talked about this before, but the origin of the first cell in the universe. That they don't have answers, and they have to trust. They have to rely on platforms that they stand on to be able to draw conclusions. And so there are areas in which science also relies on a level of trust that empirical evidence can't provide, like the soul. Lots of ambiguity, lots of questions around the human soul. And so, we can break all that down, but I think it's a good starting point.
Like, what is your perception of faith or religion? Again, a lot of people interchange it. I know it's not necessarily something you want to interchange, but yeah, it's just how will you define that to fifth grader?
No, it really depends on who you're asking that question, but to try to give something general, right? Try to give something general. They are pretty interchangeable. I mean, religion denotes a certain worldview, which comprises of faith in said entity or entities, right? If we're going to hit a general thing, if we're not just talking about Christianity. So I would say it's somewhat interchangeable, but yeah, I mean, religion is just it's a held belief with certain worldviews and reliance in God or gods. I could get granular and talk and say that humanism is a religion as well, because at the end of the day, there's a belief in the ultimacy of their reason and their human thinking, right?
It's a belief system. It encompasses, yeah.
He should have started first.
No,
I like to be all
that's what you're saying.
complicated. I'm taking people on 635 and 75. He just put them on Beltline. Here we go. Bam.
No, you know what? People need to hear from everybody, man. We're all, this is how we can, we're all different. We communicate differently.
Yeah, that's good. So
the most basic definition of faith is trust, right? And then when we're talking about in the context of science, I would take it a step further and say it's trust in the supernatural. What I mean by that is trust in the non-material world, things that you can't quantify, hold to, and see, right? And that gets at the core, and I don't know how we're going to get into the threads here because there's a lot of tentacles to this, but This is why we believe that you cannot practice science without a belief in God, whether you consciously are aware of it or not, because you are, when we talk about faith and trusting the supernatural, there are things that are outside of the material world. I mentioned the soul, but logic, those are things that are not tangible, material things that you can't prove its existence, but we all live under the law of logic or the law of reason, or Kev mentioned earlier, the law of gravity. You can see its effects and live within them, but you can't prove their existence in a material, natural world in which the science community generally lives. And so there's a lot there, but yeah.
No, that's good. You hit it on the head. The intangibles. Ours, so we relate to sports using the sports analogy. We understand intangibles when it comes to sports. You know, when somebody say they got that dog in them, obviously they didn't come from a dog breed. It's an intangible. It's something in them. It's a drive. It's a force. Russell Westbrook in his early years, where he was just drive to the paint. Derrick Rose, those type of guys, just drive to the paint. Think of football, Derrick Henry, those kind of guys, just a dog. Like you can't stop them no matter who they play. You know they gonna get the ball, and you can't stop them. It's those intangibles. It's something that can't be taught. You want to bring it to real life. You know, at my job when I was in leadership, customer service is an intangible. Like you being able to communicate effectively with a customer, and being able to de-escalate situations. That's something I can't teach you. I can give you tools, I can give you tips, but that's just something that is naturally, you have to develop. It could be a skill that you could develop, but at the same time, you just got to be a nice person. You can't be a mean person. You just hate people and be good at customer service. It's going to be very difficult. And so these intangibles are the same thing, you know. There's something embedded in every human being to want to have a purpose, like have an impact in some way, regardless of their faith, regardless of their belief system, their worldview. The mere fact that there's debates, I have yet, maybe I'm wrong, but I have yet to see a debate between scientists and an evangelist of Santa Claus, a scientist and an evangelist of the Easter Bunny. And you know what I mean? Like these kid fables that we understand is man-made. I haven't seen a debate on that. I haven't seen nobody do a debate on the Tooth Fairy. You know what I mean? Like try to
stick around, bro.
It's coming.
I'm sure one's out there.
Well, I'm just saying, like, I don't see people get riled up. People don't get riled up about the Tooth Fairy. Like, they don't cause their emotion. But you're here even now, like, in culture, you're here, like, you know, you can think of comedy. I touch on everything except for somebody's politics and somebody's religion. You know, but it's like those two things I'm not going to touch. It's like embedded in our culture. So to Hector's point, I think those intangibles is what we identify as faith, or belief system, or worldview, is that it's something embedded in you to want to be purposeful in what you do. Because all we are is the result of atoms and protons and neutrons and a cosmic explosion. And, you know, we just evolved over time. We'll get into the nuances of that, like the possibilities of that or whatever. But if that's all we are, then what is the point? What is this moral code that we all share? What is this desire to love? Why is prison a big deal? Prison is not bad if you think about it in and of itself. If it's just atoms and all they're doing is putting you in a cage, and you say you got to stay here for X amount of time. It's not like, there's some bad prisons, right, where you may have to do some physical labor and stuff like that, but for the most part, that's all it is. Put you here. Like, people hate to be put in a hole, a dark room where you're locked up. Why is that? It's something that's that intangible. It's something embedded in you that, no, this is not life.
You're essentially exposing some of the problems with an atheistic, scientific, material only, natural only worldview is essentially what you're walking through. Is you're exposing some of the gaps of that belief system. If we're all reduced to atoms, and there's no real meaning. Everything will die, will go away. The universe will absorb itself, and then a new one will explode, and there's no purpose to life. And you're calling out some things that we have issues with.
And Terrence, you hit a lot of things in there. That wasn't necessarily a tangent. I'll say this, man. This conversation, I probably joked about it, but we literally could do several parts on it because there's just so much that we just won't be able to break into. Like you started talking about the problem of the atheistic problem of dignity and personal freedom. What's the point of dignity? Why attend a funeral if we're reduced to atoms and we're atoms in motion, right, et cetera? Why even have a debate if you're an atheist, right? Why are you trying to be reasonable? What's the point of rationality in the first place? Why are you pushing it? Why do you require it? In a chance-driven worldview, right? Rationality, it presupposes structure, order. So what you were saying is really good. I think, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but I think also we should define science. And I say that because I've said a lot of different things earlier, and I was just thinking to myself, like, well, let me explain why I feel the way I do. So I kept talking about, I feel like I'm in the scientific community. I know what they mean when they label that, but we're all scientists if you understand what it means. I just have a different employment of science. I don't have an atheistic viewpoint. So if we can just understand that science, generally, I'm not trying to get super, super deep on it, is essentially the study of the material world through observation, experimentation, and testing, right? And you are essentially drawing conclusions based on that experimentation and testing against other evidences, exposed. So at the core of it, that's it. And we all do that on a daily basis, like I said, whether consciously or unconsciously. We do this all the time. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because not everybody would fully understand what science is. Some people relate science to biology. Well, that's not science, right? I mean, it's in and of itself, right? You're employing scientific method, but it's not in and of itself science, or, just pick an ology, if you will.
I just want to say, by the way, that non-Christian scientists, I should say, non-Christian scientists are really borrowing from the Christian worldview anyway to carry out their experimental observational science. Think about it. When they're doing observational science using a scientific method, they have to assume the laws of logic, they have to assume the laws of nature, they have to assume the uniformity of nature. I mean, think about it. If the universe came about by natural processes, where'd the laws of logic come from? Did they just pop into existence? Are we in a stage now where we only have half logic? So you see, I have a question for Bill Nye. How do you account for the laws of logic and the laws of nature from a naturalistic worldview that excludes the existence of God? Now, in my opening statement, I also discussed a different type of science or knowledge, origins or historical science. See, again, there's a confusion here. There's a misunderstanding here. People, by and large, have not been taught to look at what you pick on these topics.
So, okay. Yeah, I agree with him 100%. Let me just say that off the rip. I agree with him. So essentially what he's saying is at the core, and that's why I defined science earlier. Hector used the word earlier, empirical, right? That's just what can be experienced with the senses. And that's essentially, if you reduce it, what scientific, atheistic scientific methodology is. They hold that all knowledge, anything that you know, as a matter of fact, everything that you know, Ken Ham is talking about is at the core of atheistic scientific methodology is chance, right? We talked about that. It's a chance driven, no singularities, no, no order, right? That's essentially the core of that scientific bedrock. Well, what he's saying is if that's the case, if you want to be consistent in your worldview, right, then you have an issue when you're doing science if you believe that at the bedrock of all things is chance. Because in order to do science properly, you have to assume that nature is uniform, it's predictable, and it acts in a law-like fashion, right? It's the only way that you can do science. So you do what's called inductive inference. You say, based on what happened in the past, under certain circumstances, whatever the experimentation and observation is, we conclude that this will happen in the future. That's all people are doing. Is inductive reasoning. So what he's saying is if chance is legitimately how the universe runs, or multiverse, you could even take it that way if you really believe in chance. Nothing's connected. If chance is how the universe operates, then how do you know that in the future that what you observed in the past will be the same? How do you know that things will operate uniformly? Well, he's saying Christians can know that. Genesis chapter 8, verse 21, 22, seed time and harvest, summer and winter. We know that there's order. We serve an orderly God who created all things. Bible says he uphold all things by his powerful word. So there's order. We don't have a chance worldview. So Christians, we can rightfully employ those laws, but a scientist really can't give an account for why they believe in chance, but rely on uniformity. So that's essentially what Ken Ham is saying.
Yeah, so I get that in the sense of the origins of the earth because, nobody, we say we know because we have the scriptures, but as far as a scientist, being able to quantify it, yeah, obviously they can't do that. But I kind of see that Christians are people of faith. I say Christians because obviously that's the faith I know, right? But just religious people in general. I see a lot of times that we attach the I don't knows to God. So the things that could be pretty much that's already been resolved through scientific mathematical methods, whatever the case may be, even though as somebody of the faith, we would say you came up with that mathematical method because you used the laws that God had already established. I get that. But for the purpose of this conversation, they're not attributing that process to God, right? They're just saying, hey, this person, Einstein or whoever, wanted to understand why did this happen. They came up with some mathematical equation. It turned out to identify, this may be why it happened. And then, years later, 50 years, 60 years later, we see, that equation is valid because we were able to use that equation to measure such and such. And now we know if we send a satellite out here, we'll be able to get communication within 3 seconds, whatever the case may be. Like you said, it could go in so many variables based on whatever you're talking about. And so, but I don't know if anybody have an opinion on that. I see when it comes to the I don't knows, like if you hit that the clip I shared, if you listen to the end of that debate when they had to kind of have an opportunity to go back and forth, that's kind of Ken Ham's thing. Like you can't prove. Well, that's the whole point of science is we can't prove right now, but hey, maybe there's a kid out there that can one day. But that's the beauty of science. We love that curiosity. We love the I don't knows. But Christians is like, oh, see, you don't know. That's God. I kind of have a problem with that, but anybody got a thought on that?
Yeah, I'll share some thoughts, and you might scrape all this from the tape, but we can jump into it. I think one, I think this goes back to what we were saying earlier about the false dichotomy of science versus faith, because when someone attributes to God the unknowns, they're not wrong. Even if they don't know how to land there, they're not wrong. And the scientific community wants to live, and again, I know we're talking in generalities, but for the sake of the argument, right? The scientific community wants to live in only what is proven. And I think what we've done so far is prove that they don't. And so they're inconsistent in their own worldview. They don't just live within what they can prove. They live in a universe of things they can't prove, and they're functioning within that very comfortably and not attributing it to God. And the Bible talks about this. We suppress the truth, right? We are living in a world where we're suppressing the truth. Like, our state is not a neutral state. As people in this world,
Right.
our state is not neutral. Like, we're not coming to the table and saying, well, let me find out about God. It's not the case. The Bible makes it clear that everyone is living in a state of suppression. So immediately our state of mind is one of doubt and disproving God's existence, because our very heart is turned against him, right? So when we say science is out to prove things, but the faith community will just be dismissive and say, oh, I don't know the answer, but it's God. That also makes it seem like science owns reason and evidential like conclusions, and that's not the case either. They don't own that, and we're not, in
Why
this
is there
constant.
But why is there segregation? So, like, why is there? Because again, like you referenced the book Redeeming Science, right? And so we know that there's Christian scientists that appreciate all of the processes of scientific measures. So I don't like this separation. To Kel's point earlier, he loves science. He's in the science community.
Yeah.
So I don't think there should be a separation. Now, so it's the issue that you guys have. Is it more like, because if you're an atheist and you using science to try to prove that there is no God, that's a whole different conversation. Like Kel said, that's a part 4, part 5. But if I'm just talking about the core nature of scientific measures, why can't that be celebrated more by those in the faith?
I'll say something real quick, Kev. I mean, everyone jump in, but I'll say a lot of this has been politicized, right? So we know we all live in the United States, and so we know like prayer, what's a part of schools, and there was a day where it was very common for people to attend church, and it was celebrated. Politicians going to church. And then when the science community started coming out with, like the theory of evolution, which that theory in itself is in some ways contradicting to the biblical narrative, that became a huge talking point, right? And so now you're creating these divisions. And I think, in the political realm, those became talking points and banners, and I think it started creating these separations that, to your point, now we live in this, it's got to be all science and all faith. We're in different camps, and now we, and I think why I love this conversation is because we're trying to bridge the gap to say, it shouldn't be that way, to your point.
Yeah, and it kind of what I was saying earlier, right? Like Hector used it well, the false dichotomy. It is a false dichotomy. The employment of it is the heart of the matter, right? And like Hector was talking about, there's no such thing as neutrality, right? A lot of people say, well, let's just come to the table neutral. There's no such thing. You by nature have an anti-theistic presupposition. You presuppose that there's no God, thus you come to the table and you want me to come the same way, right? There's no neutrality, right? But yeah, I think that's the, if I'm answering just what you brought up, Terrence, spot on with Hector. It's been weaponized, it's been politicized, and so and not just that. And then of course you got the age of enlightenment, back in the 19th century, and all of those things where people, were exalting reason, which it has its limits, right? But the exaltation of reason, all these things kind of come together. And so when Christians hear science or they hear the word reason, a lot of them, unless you're like, a few people that love that kind of, that, that's about that life. Shout out to Pastor Al Reaver, if he's watching this, right? People like that, they love this kind of stuff because we understand. I'm probably going to butcher this, but I was just thinking about a scripture. I don't know the address. I can find it. It's in the old Tinker.
It's the power of edit, bro. You can go ahead and search and get that thing.
No, it's good. It says it's the, that's true. But it says it's the glory of God to conceal a matter, but it's the honor of the king to search that matter out. There are things in life that we search and we research and we experiment, even as believers, right? But it's the glory of God. He knows the answer. God is the final authority when it comes to truth and how we arrive to truth. So to Hector's point, when we lean into the all-knowing personal God who's revealed himself and is revealing things about himself, not wrong, and it's from the scientific community, it's an unargued position where it's like, oh, well, they're just blind faith. It's not blind faith. They're operating in blind faith because they have to use something that they don't agree with to even try to postulate anything in the future. So,
all right.
Anyhow, I Hector spot on with that.
All right, so let's listen to this. I think this kind of
that was by the way, I don't know if you want to include this, but this is the power of having three people here. I searched the verse. It's Proverbs 25:2. So
there you go.
There we go. I knew it was up here, man. I forgot the streets. I didn't know if I was on Elm.
Yeah, I thought it was 34:5, but yeah, you're right. Go ahead. Anyway, I know my Bible. So.
What is deuce?
All right, here you go.
The new, and so we were allowed to bring in the theory of general relativity. But if science had the same sort of motivation or system of thought like theology, then general relativity, which 100 years later, and we're still standing on the shoulders of Einstein. But if they had the same sort of culture as a theologian, then whatever was old is best. There's no space for new understanding. And so if that's the case, if one is canon and one is always up for interpretation, or not even just interpretation, but up for complete revision, then the one that is stagnant, at least for the Christian, at least for the faithful, the religious, that becomes old in with the new.
All right, so that's Joseph Solomon. I'll post this information at the bottom, but you could catch more about that on the Shores podcast channel, where he kind of expounds. This is somebody that was big in the faith, Christian faith, as far as in the youth area, young adults area, poetry, music, and kind of left Christianity in the last few years. But on that clip, he kind of talks about the culture of the religious groups versus science. Like, so if all scientists needed to do was just hinge on the scripture, there'd be no exploration. Am I wrong in thinking that? Like, they was just, okay, God said it, so that's it. There's no need to explore. So it's fine.
Yeah, that's wrong. So number one, because we're finite beings, I could probably stop right there. We don't know everything, right? So we trust in the one that knows all things, even if we can't come up with an answer. So we can trust that even if we don't know it, God knows all things, right? But we still explore. It's exactly what my point was earlier. I can't really, I'm not the most creative one, but there's going to be a time in your life where, and I'm just talking about small stuff, where you're trying to figure something out, you know, you're employing inductive reasoning, like, oh, I remember when I did this, that this happened when I did this. Therefore, I'm going to conclude that if I do it again, I might be able to fix this problem. I can't find that in the scripture. We know that God told Noah how to build the ark, but from what we have in the scripture, he gave him very general things. We don't see a line by line, precept upon precept manual of what he told Noah to do. Now, I can't say that he didn't do it. For whatever we have revealed in the scriptures is sufficient for what we need to know. But I could probably go out on a limb and say that maybe he left up a lot of things to Noah to explore. Adam went out with the naming of animals and all of his exploration. He didn't have the grapha, right? He didn't actually have the grapha. He didn't need it. He had the word of God, direct communication, right? He had direct revelation, right? But even in his direct revelation, he went out to explore and he had to go do things. So it's the same exact thing in the Christian faith. My leaning into the scriptures is not me ridding myself of my obligation as the creature to have dominion. Genesis says that we ought to have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and every living thing that creeps on the earth, right? And it talks about replenishing the earth, being fruitful and multiply. You can't dominate something that you don't learn about, right? So in our dominion as a Christian, this is my worldview, as I'm pursuing to have dominion in all areas of life, I have to learn about it. And so that requires inductive reasoning, which, by the way, is the foundation of science. Right?
So
I have to employ reason.
So we can attack a scientist for failing, right? Like failure is the progression to results. And so this, let's talk about like radiometric, what they call it, radiometric dating or something like that. Like there's a lot of debate around that. Ken Ham kind of touched on it a little bit in his debate with Bill Nye. But God gave human beings, right, the ability to process, think, explore. And in general, I'm trying to say this like in general, again, I'll hate that separation, but which one is using more of those faculties, the science community or the Christian community in general?
Christian community.
I disagree.
What faculties?
Just what God gave us. What God gave us, our brain, the exploration. So like Joseph Sodom was talking about the exploration, like this, in the old days,
I'll retract my answer, by the way. I didn't know what you were asking.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead. Thank you. Go ahead.
In the old days, a child will, that's foaming at the mouth, in the small society, foaming at the mouth on the floor, the priest would think, okay, they're demon possessed. We all know that seizures, now that we have this knowledge, we know that seizures lasts about 20, 30 minutes. They'll take the kid to the priest, they'll get prayed for. It subsides. The priest prayed and God, whatever. Okay, that was the thought process in the 1800s. In 2024, we be like, bro, the kid had a seizure. But the reason we know that is through exploration, through testing, through science, through development. Again, I always relate to things to culture. When I try to share, it's this guy, like, he'll play like a Jay-Z song or something like that. And it's like, what do the kid hear? Like a kid that was a Gen Z kid, they hear classical music. But to us, it's a slap. Like, I got 99 problems, but I got 99 problems, but a woman ain't one. That's what the key here. But it's the development of music, right? Like now they got access to all these different tools and things like that because of technology, and so they don't appreciate the beginnings. And so I think what I'm trying to get at, I'm trying to narrow it down, but I just don't see in it as a whole. Again, we're talking about generality. There may be pockets of people groups that do appreciate science, but also appreciate the scriptures. But in general, I don't see a lot of appreciation for the pursuit to find the answer. Me trying to find the answer is not negating your God. The answer may end up leading to God. And that's what I said, in our little private chats. Like, if through exploration, it may be 3056, it'd be like, you know what? This cannot happen without an intelligent being. I don't think majority of the science community will reject that if it's like proven. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'll say something real quick, and hopefully we can piece these together, because I'm still thinking about the question that came from watching Joseph's video a little bit.
Well, yeah, that's what I think it's hard to derive from that, though. That's what I'm saying. Like this old versus like this old way of thinking. Like just stay.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful. Just the comment you made about which you're right. If a kid was foaming at the mouth, they used to think it was demons. That's a poor employment of the scriptures, even. So I'll just say that, and then maybe we'll expand on that. But essentially, it's a poor. Nowhere in the scriptures does it say that a kid foaming from the mouth is demon possessed, right? And so,
but even that statement is the result of theology progressing over time.
Not progressing, no, sir. I don't believe in that at all. I think it's a bad interpretation of the Bible and theology. But if we just say, what does the Bible actually say? I don't think it says any of that. I think it would be helpful if we go back to maybe create some categories. To Joseph Solomon's kind of a point here is, if I can, we only watched the clip, so I want to be fair. There's probably context missing here, and so I don't want this to sound as an attack. I'm minimizing his thoughts. We'll just watch one clip, but I think if I can summarize what he's saying is, the faith community can't evolve in their views and their beliefs, but the science community can. And that's, am I kind of right on track on what he was saying?
Close. He's saying that he said that it's perceived in the faith community that if your theology evolves, then it will attack your core belief, when it could just be you have a more understanding of God.
Okay.
Kind of thing. Yeah.
That helps, because I was about to say there's categories to this. Like our theology involves in a way that we're kind of finding explanations to how things work. We learn about the body and how our body works, how our digestive system works, because technologies are evolving and we're learning about more detailed things that we didn't have access to before. I still wouldn't attribute that to, just non-Christian, because there's a lot of Christian scientists out there. I mean, a lot of them.
Not Mary Baker Eddy followers, but scientists who happen to be Christians.
That's right. Not Christian. Thank you. No, that's great. That's good. Not Christian scientists who are Christians. Thank you, bro. You know what? As opposed to like the Christian rap or rap that's a Christian debate. This is a real one, important one to distinct.
It is. You have to make that distinction.
I don't care if my rapper considers himself a Christian rapper, but I do care if my scientist considers himself a Christian scientist. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling, but when you talk about origins, right? An origin is set of stone, right? Something happened the way it happened. There's an absoluteness to something. How did the earth begin? How did life begin? How were humans created? There's no two ways about it. There's not a relative truth around it. There's an absolute truth, and we may land differently, but one is right or wrong. I guess if I can make sense of that. Where we might be involving theologically is, okay, how far are the stars from here? We don't know, but maybe there are scientific ways and methods that can show us that. And so I always just want to make sure we categorize what he's talking about. And it sounds like what he's saying is like kind of the latter example of it, where it's, hey, why can't we be open to things that can inform our faith that the scientific community might be discovering?
Yeah, because the science community is open to, again, for the most part, learning more about more than what they know currently, where it seems like that's attacked, those in the faith that have an issue with science, whether they should or not.
And I'd love to hear your thoughts again, but I do remember the clip, and at one point Joseph Solomon said, and I have the quote written here, he said, just because your theology evolves, it doesn't mean your God does. And I agreed with that statement. And I think it's also probably helpful to define what we mean by theology, the study of God, and that there's a ton of layers there. There's some foundational truths that he's clearly revealed that we don't waver on, because we trust in the God of the Bible. But there are things that he's revealed himself through nature that we're discovering. And with that statement, I agree with Joseph. I think that faith community could do a better job of that.
And Terrence, I misunderstood your question. I was trying to make sure I told you. I retract my answer. I said the Christian community. I can get into later on what I was, because I know we're pushing for time. I would like to talk. This is really good. I think we should keep this up longer, right? I'm going to go back. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think it still goes back to the way people view it. It could sometimes become semantics. It's the way people view science and how they think that the atheistic community has a patent on science, and it's not true. So that could be some of the reasons why people are a little standoffish when it comes to experimentation, observation. I spoke on it from a general level. Like, I mean, we still employ it every day, just walking, taking steps, right? That's where it sounds nerdy and weird, but just walking, you're doing science, you're assuming uniformity in nature, and you're assuming, that what you experienced in the past is going to happen in the future, but you don't even think about that, right? But on bigger things, the study of the body, the study of the cosmos, however you want to take that, the way science can go, I think people are a little, instinctively kind of putting, I have faith and I don't have to worry about all this stuff. Whereas I think there's a growing, so give a little credit, I would say, there's a growing segment of believers that understand that God is the creator of all the universe and it's all his. And to study and search out that universe, knowing that he's the creator of it all, that's a beautiful way to do science. That's an incredible way to do science. I think, and I would love to maybe have another segment on this, but I think my issue, which I'll keep going back to, we kind of hit it and moved on from it, is that scientists that don't hold a biblical worldview are operating in a very inconsistent way and cannot account for how they can use uniformity to employ their observation, experimentation, because they have a chance worldview. So that's where maybe more on the philosophical side community of people that there's an attack. My
To
attack
confirm,
isn't that you're...
Kevin, sorry, real quick to what you just said, just for confirmation, they can account for how they use uniformity in their studies. They can't account for where uniformity comes from, right?
Right. They can't account for why they can, with their worldview, why can you use that, right? Of course, I'm not saying that they can't do it well. They can't explain it. Of course they can.
Yeah, it's a matter of origin, right?
Right. It doesn't really make sense, though, because you hold to chance and not order. and structure and uniformity, and even an observation. Who observed the personal becoming impersonal? Who observed, like Ken Ham's point, when did the laws of logic just fall? I mean, who observed those things? So because because their worldview is observational, you have to answer that. But I think the scientific community gets away with not really dealing with that.
So you're not
You're
not diminishing. So you're not diminishing the science community and their efforts. You're just saying they don't attribute some. I don't know if you have a thought in your head of like the percentage that is like that. I know you didn't do a study on that maybe or whatever, but if you had to do you think that's the overwhelming majority or do you think that's a minority group?
I really don't know. Probably a majority, just because, without getting too deep, of the exaltation of reason, and with the Enlightenment, that was a huge thing. So I'd probably say a majority. But yes, I'm not saying science is wrong. What I'm saying is that you're not consistent. The philosophical world would call it epistemologically self-conscious. Basically, you use one thing or act one way, but you believe a certain way. Um, but you have to use the Christian's worldview to make yours make sense. I want to read something real quick that I think is pretty helpful. It's in the Paradox of Induction. And this is not written by a believer, by the way, okay? But it's dealing with that. So this is a point that, and I've got others that I could read too. But it says, we have no way at present of being sure that the universe is uniform. So he's saying we don't know if the universe is uniform, okay? We have only sampled physical nature and our own limited portion of the universe. We are wanting the laws of the universe to be such that we can understand them, but there's no reason offered as to why the universe should be like this. That's faith, because and Bertrand Russell, man, in this book right here, long quote that I could go through, he pretty much says the same thing. Like, at the end of the day, that's essentially what it is. But then they reduce it to relativism and say, but my truth is my truth, and whatever you believe, I won't hold it against you. Right. So there is a problem there that maybe on another segment that we can really, really dive into. That is my only issue with the atheistic scientific community, is that you're not giving credence to the creator of the universe that you're trying to discredit, but you have to use what he's given to even try to discredit him. So that's my only thing with the scientific community, if you will, but not the employment of science at all.
But can you understand why so taking yourself outside of this enlightenment that you have, and because you have this enlightenment because of the Holy Spirit, right? But taking aside this enlightenment, let's go back to K-Dub. Can you understand? Can you understand how they can have that viewpoint? Like, so it's almost like you're too smart for your own good. It's like your child finally learning something, and they know they got a deeper knowledge of something more than you. And it's like, oh, Father, I understand. He's thinking the way you think, but I have the truth. I went to MIT. I understand these things now. I have empirical data.
Yeah.
But do you understand, like kind of like what I said about word of faith in the previous videos with Hector?
Mm-hmm.
I think the Christian community just got bad PR. Like, it's a simplistic term. Like, maybe there's a group of us that, obviously there's a group that, applies these things well, right? And are very knowledgeable and things like that. But when people think Christianity, they think T.D. Jakes, Joel Osteen, like, it's the imagery that you see on TV. In the same way, when we think of scientists, we may think of the most outright, Neil deGrasse Tyson or something like that. It's the imagery. It's what we see on social media and stuff like that. So, do you understand how a scientist could have that perception? Like, yo, I'm in here doing this work. I mean, I'm just speaking I'm like trying to think about it. If I'm a scientist, I'm in here doing this work, and you coming at me about some book that was written by man 2,000 years ago, and then you're going to try to tell me that all this stuff I did is based on some mystical being that I have never seen. All right, bro, you can have it, but come at me with some some facts, some stuff I could use. And if what you come at me with can justify that there is a God, all right, cool, I'm good. But the ball is in your court. I don't mind. Everything you're enjoying is the result of my efforts and my peers' efforts. You're enjoying this electricity because of my peers' efforts. You're enjoying the cell phone, whatever the case may be. I understand you saying it's a God, but we doing the work over here. How that be when you put it to work? You should talk about this theological stuff. What would you say to that?
I mean, I can understand. Sorry to interrupt here, but I can understand. We went over it earlier. It's Romans 1, right? By their unrighteousness they suppress the truth. So I understand behind their arguments why they're approaching it that way. But to be fair, I understand also when their whole worldview is reduced to reason and trying to prove things from a materialistic point of view, they're missing out. I mean, they're missing out on so much, right? We know that, but I understand why they are so dismissive of it, because they frame their whole worldview around things that they can prove. But I'll say even this, this idea of I need proof of God to believe in Him. If you show me this empirical evidence, then I'll believe. That in itself is a statement of faith, because the statement itself can't be like empirically proven. So basically it's an assertion, it's not really an argument, right? Like they can't meet their own criteria. Like everybody bases their lives on things they can't prove. Like you talk about human rights, you talk about the deep convictions, they can't prove, existence or origin of logic, things like that. And so that's a false argument. It's really not an argument, because again, what we've been proving is they believe in things that they can't empirically prove. They live out of things that they can't empirically prove. And so if that really is their assertion against God alone, it can't be. But that is to me evidence of suppression of truth, which again comes from the Bible. The Bible is explaining how they can make these types of arguments, and to kind of reduce it to a summarized version. This type of scientist is saying, show me empirical evidence that God exists, but because you can't, I won't believe. They should apply that to the same statement to other things, like show me evidence of love. If I can't prove it, then I can't live in it. Show me evidence of the laws of logic. If you can't prove it, I won't believe in it. Show me evidence, and so on and so forth, right? And so that's at the core of that, I think, argument is anyway, yeah. You cut that last.
No, that's good. What would you say, Hector, to the scientist if he says yet? So everything you're saying, I can't prove it yet. Because again, like going back, and I'm pressing in on this because that's really what it is. It's just like, get on the boat with me. I almost feel like both sides are saying, get in the boat with me. Get in the boat with me over here on the scriptures. I'm trying to understand how the scriptures came about, how we came to this viewpoint, understanding my experience. And maybe you'll have a better understanding, and it will help you in your pursuit and everything you do. The scientists are saying, get in the boat with me, understand how we do things. And, so it's like everything. It's two groups that's just like, you're not hearing me. You're trying to defend your position, but you're not hearing my position.
So I would say this, that again, it goes back to for lack of a better word, the hypocrisy of it. So Christians are required to bring intelligible, reasonable arguments, justifiable judgments, coherent communication. That's what the science community wants. Nobody out there watching this video would disagree with me. That's what the science community demands, right? However, they don't live up to that. So that's the challenge. Like, so for me, the challenge would be,
Is it because they don't see it?
no, that's not the challenge. Here's what I'm trying to say. So at the core of an atheistic, so let me step back. We are assuming an atheistic scientific position. I'm assuming, right? Versus a Christian worldview. Okay, that's important for me to know. Okay, if that's the case, again, it's a worldview that's based on chance, chaos, disorder, not singularities, not laws, etc. Okay, that is the atheistic worldview. It is that's exactly what the worldview is. So here's where I'm trying to get at. If that's the case, why do you want us to be reasonable anyway? Why are you pressing a Christian for reason when in your worldview, reason doesn't exist because it requires logic and proper use of its laws? So what I'm saying is they can use it, but they can't properly give an account as to why they're using it, is the whole point that I'm trying to communicate. And they're pressing the Christian community for a reason for this, intelligibility for this. But the scientific community is not intelligible when it comes to how they're employing laws of logic, reason, pressing for this. It's a lot of contradictions because they're asking for something that their worldview shouldn't, if they're being honest, that their worldview doesn't even contain, if they're honest with themselves, if they're honest. Okay. So that's the point that I'm trying to bring, is that, okay, I understand what you're wanting me to do here. I get it. However, let's be honest. Look at your worldview. Which one of the worldviews meets the preconditions for intelligibility? It's Christianity, because we can actually have a reason for why we press people to have a reason and believe in order, etc. Right? People want to call you more superior. No, I'm not trying to say that. I lean into the supreme being of all things. So that's where I think a lot of it, and we'll probably have more conversations about it, is that's the issue, is like you're being hypocritical in what you're asking the Christian community to do, because you yourself have a worldview that only what you know can be something on which you have observed.
I would love some
if
examples
you
of
reduce
that.
that to absurdum.
I would admit I'm with you only because I'm one of you, if that makes sense. But if I was not of the faith, I think I would struggle with that a little bit. So I would love like to some examples. Like we definitely need to do another part.
Yeah, sure.
We've called out
for example.
We've called out a few throughout the podcast we can recall.
Yeah, like for example, right? Let's just use basic laws of logic. So they're pressing for a reason, right? They don't want contradictions, because they'll be quick to say that a Christian is contradictory. So let's talk about the law of non-contradiction. It means this can't be, A cannot be non-A, right? It can't. That's a basic law that applies to all people at all times and all places, right? But when was the last time they've actually observed empirically the laws of logic? You can't see the laws of logic. You can't warm them up in a microwave and take a bite out of them. You can't scoop them up with a spoon. It's an immaterial thing.
Yes.
But in an atheistic, right. And to answer your question, you know what? I got off. Nope. I'm glad you said that. To answer that question, if they said yet, then I would say, then you won't have the same worldview that you have. You can't. You can't have the same worldview. Like Anthony Flew. Anthony Flew is he went from atheist to agnostic because inductive reasoning was killing his brain. He couldn't understand how he got to the point where he felt hypocritical, which he was. And then he reduced it. Of course, he didn't say I believe in the God of the Bible or anything, but he was like, I have to conclude that there is a higher supreme being that is ruling the universe. He didn't give credence to Christianity, so I'm not going that far, but he abandoned that worldview because it was self-destructive. His was self-destructive too, but that worldview was very self-destructive. The very thing that you're coming at, you're using. So if someone said yet, then I would say, well, then that you wouldn't hold to the same worldview that you have if you felt like you were able to give an answer for that, because it's hard to give an answer for immaterial things with a material worldview.
So let me end with Hector. If you need to say something, go ahead. But I want to end with the clip from Joseph Solomon. One of the clips I sent y'all, only because again he is someone that shared the worldview we have, had the understanding that we have, but still kind of went a different direction.
Is this always comes off as disingenuous, much like the theologian who, quote unquote, eisegetes scripture and picks and chooses what parts suit his needs. The Christian apologist embraces science when it can be tailored to its needs, but disparages it when it doesn't. Do you know how we came to the Big Bang Theory? This theory that he's alluding to here. Observation of the accelerating expansion of the universe. Scientists noticed that, hey, the universe, planets are racing away from each other. Matter is racing away from each other. And they came to the conclusion that the universe is expanding. This was what we realized before the Big Bang Theory came to be. And then also cosmic background radiation. So the comment section is.
So, okay. So yeah, what are your thoughts there? I'm someone that he kind of put words to how I was feeling in a period of time, if I could be transparent. But because I used to really get into debates and stuff like that. But any thoughts on that clip?
I think Joseph's statement in itself is actually disingenuous, because it assumes that the scientific community doesn't do the very thing that he's blaming Lee Strobel doing. The scientific community does this all the time. They take parts of either the process to make conclusions on evidence, and they reject some from other scientists, or they might reject other scientists' conclusions altogether as well. So if you say Christians are disingenuous because we take parts of science that we agree with and then we dismiss the others, who's to say we can't do that? The science community does it. They do it all the time. A great example of that was just COVID. Like COVID was an eruption of the scientific community disagreeing with each other, and some of it was ill-willed, and some of it was genuine, but it was just the fact that they had to rush to try to find evidence, use their scientific tools to try to find evidence for what the virus was, how to treat it. And there were a lot of things that they learned early on that they thought they learned that were accurate, that then later on they found that they weren't accurate. So that's just an example, a really close example of how the scientific community does the exact same thing that he's blaming Christians of doing. Goes to say that science is the arbiter of truth. And I would argue that they're not. Science only helps with a section of our worldview, but they're missing out on a whole other section of our worldview that they don't tap into and they don't speak into. And I would argue that they're missing out on the emotional, the spiritual, those non-tangibles that Kev's already talked about, the things that they can't materialistic prove, that they still live within. Those things they can't prove. And so anyway, So I would say it's disingenuous because it's inconsistent, and that would be my comment to the video.
That's good. Kev, you got anything?
It's a good combo, man. That was powerful, Hector, actually, of what you just kind of mentioned there. And Christians do this too. A lot of people do this. It's just in general. We take certain things for granted and we give it a privileged position and we just move accordingly. And like Hector was saying, like, who says we can't do that? Like, are you the final authority on who can do stuff like that, you know? So I want to say that, you know, a lot of what some of the complaints in the scientific community, a lot of them in terms of their I would say their attitude towards Christians when it comes to our response to science, a lot of it is warranted, you know, because we talked about it over and over again. It's just been this, for whatever reason, this elongated position that Christians have, that, you know, that even scientists have, that you can't intertwine the two. And it's like what Hector just said, science is it's a gift of God to explore the universe that he created to further have more dominion. But it's not the only way to gain knowledge. It's a piece. And that's where the atheists stop in what Hector was saying. So mine are just comments on what he's saying. That piece right there was probably the best piece to me in this whole conversation that we had, is that they're missing out big time, because science is just a piece of how we know what we know and how we can arrive to what we know. It's just a piece. But they make it the end all be all. But I can see where people get it, man. I think a lot of people need to be educated, you know, just even in critical thinking. I've always believed that. I don't think that's pushed enough in schools. There aren't courses on critical thinking at all. People take things for granted. I watch debates and I see people just, they're just using just prejudicial conjectures, and they're assuming things. And it's like, wait a minute, this isn't a reasonable conversation at all. And it's okay. We just gotten to the point where conversations don't have to be rational. So, these conversations, I think, are needed, man. And it helps me even just being a part of this group here, just talking about it and hearing what I'm saying. And you really believe this, and why do you believe it? And listen to those things. So nothing. Mad respect, man, for you know, syndicating this thing, brother, for sure.
Yeah,
Indeed.
yeah. Look, we understand that we live in a sinful world full of sinful people, and unfortunately, there have been scientists who have the degrees that have taken advantage of you know, of the world by their studies. A lot of them don't apply the scientific method properly. There's a lot of debate within the scientific community about this. There's been scientists that have been excommunicated from the scientific community because they haven't gone through the proper process. And but anybody with a degree, PhD, can come up and say, or whatever we want to say, they haven't arrived properly at their conclusions. They haven't tested experiment properly, whatever. And so there's a reason for that. One thing I'll say, hopefully, is an encouragement, and Terrence, I talked to you about this a little bit, as an encouragement for believers. When you made the statement, you know, from a scientist's perspective, saying, "Hey, I haven't proven the laws of logic yet," or "I haven't proven the existence of this intangible yet." One thing I'll say is, as believers, because we can get into these debates, and they're very heady, and that's fine. As believers, we have to keep in mind that reason and logic and evidence alone, actually, those things in themselves cannot save a person. So you will never be able to reason a person into a relationship with God. You will never be able to logically reason somebody into a relationship with God. The point here isn't to be equipped to be able to then convince somebody to love God. It is to help uncover the majesty of God through conversations. But ultimately, and this is what Christians from centuries past have had. So even if we haven't had the revelations that we have now from the scientific community about how the universe may work or how our bodies work, there were people thousands of years ago that had no understanding of any of that, no explanation of any of that. But they did have the one thing that was needed to be able to have a relationship with God, and that was Jesus, the Holy Spirit that opens the eyes of people's hearts to believe in him. And so and this is not dismissive. I think we've proven through the conversation and probably next podcast that we're not afraid to talk within reason and have critical thinking and how we've arrived at some of our conclusions. But it is the absolute truth that unless the Holy Spirit opens the eyes of the heart, they will not see God, and they will continue to suppress the truth.
No, it's good. Keep the main thing, for sure. Francis Collins, I have found that there is a wonderful harmony in the complementary truths of science and faith. The God of the Bible is also the God of Genemy. God can be found in the cathedral or in the laboratory. Investigating God's majestic and awesome creation, science can actually be a means of worship.